Okay, here we are back in the next video about minorities. Friends, foes, and how to create fruitful relationships. Now, of course, minorities in Israel and in India, the greatest minority is Muslim. In India, of course, there are more denominations of Islam. There are no Shiites in Israel. There are no Ahmadis, etc. But this, what we are saying here, we will deal separately with the question of Islam. There are, of course, separate questions, and I realize that Islam is a contentious topic for discussion. It is very politically charged, both in Israel and in India and other places. And there are many Muslim factions that are not friendly towards discussing these topics. But we will have a separate discussion about Islam. Here, I want to discuss the framework of minorities in general. Of course, this can apply to Sikh minorities or any minorities in general. Okay, so let's get to it. Okay, so different issues here. So clear definitions of friend and foe. Not all minorities are friends, and not all minorities are enemies, and not all minorities that are enemies will remain enemies forever, and not all minorities that are friends, unfortunately, will remain friends forever. So we have to have clear definitions of exactly what we are dealing with, as politically unpleasant as it might be to discuss these issues. I mean, if we have radicals within us, and they are bringing the country into dangerous directions, we have to discuss it openly, and we can't be afraid to discuss these issues. We have to, again, in Eastern cultures, of course, in all Eastern cultures, or in politically correct cultures in the West, there are issues that are not to be discussed, of course, and it is deemed very problematic to discuss them. They are not to be discussed in media, but again, these discussions have to take place. You can decide how public they can be. They can be in closed rooms. I personally think they should be in public also, because if important and responsible figures will not discuss these issues publicly, they will only be discussed by rabble-rousers and troublemakers on Twitter and Facebook, and that is the worst kind of discussion that can be had. So I think the discussion must be had. So we have to have clear definitions of who our friends are, who our enemies are, and how we can move our friends, our enemies into the category of friends, and how we can keep our friends in the category of friends. We have to have an agenda of problem-solving orientation, and not idealism. We should not be telling ourselves that because so-and-so is a Muslim, then he is by definition our enemy. Or because so-and-so is a Hindu, he is by definition our friend. We have to be able to address problematic people as problematic people, and people who are not problematic as not problematic. In Israel, for instance, there is now a group called a political party called Ram. They are part of the Islamic Brotherhood, which is a globalist Islam, Islamic revival movement that is outlawed in most Arab countries. In Israel, there is the northern branch of the Islamic movement and the southern branch. The northern branch has been outlawed. They were terrorist supporters. The southern branch is a unique format in the Islamic Brotherhood, which openly opposes terror. They openly oppose terrorism against Israelis. They have defied the leaders of the Islamic movement, the global Muslim Brotherhood movement, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the chief legal authority of the Islamic Brotherhood, and they oppose terrorism, and they are in the government now. And many Jews don't view this kindly. They say they are Muslim Brotherhood. They are enemies not only of Israel. They are enemies in Arab countries. These people are outlawed. How can they be in the government here? They shouldn't be legal in the first place. Whereas other people, myself included, will say that there are elements in the Muslim Brotherhood, in the southern branch, that are actually elements that we should be working with. So again, we have to have an orientation of problem solving and not looking for enemies. We should not look for enemies or declare people as enemies. In other words, we should try to address the facts as they are. If they are enemies, they are enemies. If they are not enemies, they are not enemies. We should not look for enemies, and we should not appease radicals. The same logic applies in the other direction. If it is obvious that people are radicals, they should be declared radicals. We should not try to stick our heads in the sand and say, okay, maybe it will be better, or 50 years ago they were great people. If they are radicals, they are radicals. It's as simple as that, and that should be said. Now, of course, with minorities, there are different models of legal status, as we mentioned in the previous clip: civil autonomy, the millet, secularism, etc. Religious law. Again, how much? The second question I dealt with in the last clip of majoritarianism. Do we want to institute religious law, outlawing the sale of beef or the sale of bread on the holiday of Passover, of Pesach in Israel, etc.? Do we want to do such things? Or do we want to allow freedom for all? And of course, the question of group status. In many European countries, there are recognized minorities. In Israel, most people vehemently oppose this idea because they think that giving Israeli Arabs, who are 20% of the population, group status is one step from autonomy and secession. So they oppose this. When are accusations of dual loyalty a sincere concern, or when are they communal harassment? Again, dual loyalty, there can actually be dual loyalty. Of course, these are charges that are leveled many times unjustly against Jews in America, in Jewish minorities in Europe. In Israel, they are leveled many times against Israeli Arabs, and it should be said that the radical elements in Israeli Arab society, parties such as Balad, who are, I would say, a fascist Arab party, they have open dual loyalty. And if not for the extreme liberal approach of the Israeli courts, that party would have been outlawed many times over. So dual loyalty is a real thing. You just have to, again, you have to assess the facts. You cannot declare someone that he has dual loyalty because you don't like him and therefore you declare he has dual loyalty. Again, if people openly are spying for enemy countries, as was the case with a parliament member in Israel, Azmi Bishara, who fled the country after he was accused of espionage. Again, then you have obvious dual loyalty, and sometimes you should even go to jail for it. But again, if people do not have dual loyalty, you should not accuse them of having dual loyalty. It should be based on evidence. You cannot just, because you don't like someone, declare him an enemy of the state. Now, creating the constructive discourse and dialogue. What should be discussed in public and how much? As I said beforehand, in Eastern countries or in politically correct cultures like Sweden or America, there are issues that are not to be discussed. I personally, as an Israeli, as you may know, Israelis are the most outspoken nation in the world. We say our opinion, and we just do it, and we say the truth, and we are not afraid to do it. Politically correct forces are much weaker here in Israel than in America or in Sweden. But again, I respect the fact that there are other cultures in which there are other modes of conversation. As I said beforehand, regardless of what the custom is, I think the goal should be to have civil discourse on many issues that, in other words, to have as few taboo issues as possible. As I said, if you do not discuss these issues publicly, they will be discussed. They will be discussed by the worst and most flagrantly offensive people on Twitter, on Facebook, on radical television networks run by Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon and things like that. So you want to discuss these issues. I think discussing them openly in whatever mode should be a goal. But again, I respect every society has to establish its own norms. Now, another issue, as I began discussing, is disarming inflammatory forces. Politicians, media, celebrities, who for cheap populistic motives, they want to, the louder they will be, the more outrageous they will be. They will get more rating, they will get more money, more popularity. These are, of course, counterproductive forces, and we should have a way. Again, the media will be media. The media are not philosophers. They are not pundits, but again, we have to make sure that they do not control civil discourse. This is a very serious issue, and this has to be discussed. How we have civil discourse between with different societies in our countries that have objective disagreements. And of course, policy making. Policy making has to be based on facts and not on hatred and revenge and things like that. So again, these are serious issues that have to be discussed. Okay, so there we have it, and the next issue we will discuss Islam in particular.